Good evening. My name is Lilith from Biesen. I'm a solution architect at Wake, and thank you for joining my presentation, Greens and Veg. So Greens and Veg is a wholesaler. They sell vegetables to restaurants, and they actually serve as a middleman between farms and restaurants. They are operating globally in over 200 countries, which means we have to consider multilingual and multi-currency needs. With regard to multilingual, we can use translation workbench, custom labels, community translations, and of course, we'll have to also use duplicate email templates, reports, and dashboards per language to facilitate this. With regard to the target audience, we will be having internal users, external service agents, suppliers, and customers using the system. The objective of the project is system consolidation, as well as enhanced mobile and customer experience. With regard to the org strategy, I opted for a single org, as there are quite a few similar processes, and we see that there are some cross-functional and cross-regional data visibility needs. Some of the risks that I identified and mitigated were large data volumes, where I will be using custom indexes as well as archival to the data warehouse. In addition, we see that the evergreen and marketplace applications do not have mobile applications and do not work well on mobile. So my proposal here is to replace marketplace by customer community and partially replace evergreen functionalities by the partner community. Some of the assumptions that I made are that the country-specific variations are quite minor, and we can handle them with record types and similar tools, which I will cover later. Also, I assume that the identification and verification process is a manual one by a specific team that can be facilitated with updates as part of this process via account fields which are updated manually. Also, I assume that the NetSuite system can send the emails relevant to invoicing so that we don't need to bring the invoices into Salesforce. With regard to the actors that I have identified, we see that there's a few managing customer accounts. So those are customer account manager, director, and the VP for customer account managers. I gave these internal users the Service Cloud license, as I see that they will be working with cases and service contracts, and I figured this was the best way to facilitate this. I did mention case escalation because it seemed to be necessary at first, but I didn't encounter it later on, so you can disregard this one. We also have supplier agents and service agents. So the supplier agent, I gave the Service Cloud license, as again, we will be working quite closely with some Service Cloud functionalities. Also, I give them the Tableau CRM Growth license to have some advanced reporting needs covered. With regard to the service agent, they will be using Service Cloud Voice, Service Cloud, of course, and then Live Agent licenses, as they will need access to cases, entitlement, and of course, yeah, Service Cloud Voice and Live Agent capabilities, or live chat capabilities. The final internal user is the product manager, who I also gave Service Cloud, as we can then use omnichannel for them. And they also need some advanced reporting, so I also gave them Tableau CRM Growth license. For all of these, I propose to use a single sign-on as the identity flow for them. I have introduced Okta, but I will cover that in the system landscape. One of the external users that will also be using these single sign-on capabilities is the service agent partner. I gave them the Customer Community Plus license, as they need some more advanced case management capabilities. With regard to the supplier and the customer, I gave these external users the Customer Community license so that they can log cases, review orders, and in some cases create orders themselves. And for these, Salesforce will be the identity provider. With regard to roles and the role hierarchy, we see that they have the CEO at the top, and then we made distinction between the customer account management, the supplier management, service, and product management into different executive functions. Underneath the customer account management, we see that we have a VP per region, and under each VP, we have the customer account manager. We have a similar setup for the supplier as well, with the supplier agent below the VP for this region. And for the GVP of service, we have the service agent immediately below because they're working cross-regionally. And we also have this external service agent partner below, which will be an external role as the account will be owned by the GVP of service. And then finally, we have the product management teams. And there we have a few different categories underneath which we will find a product manager responsible for these particular categories. Now, I did consider here going with territory management, but I decided not to, as first of all, we're using mostly Service Cloud capabilities, and it's one of the needs that we have with regard to regionality is more located on the case object, which isn't entirely suitable for territory management. So that's why I decided to go with this structure instead. With regard to the system landscape, we see that we have a few different users. So we have, for example, our customer and our supplier. Both will be having their own mobile publisher app, which will then be directly to their respective communities, being the customer or the partner community. And this will be using the user agent flow. We also have our internal user and our service agents. And as I mentioned, we will be using Okta as the identity provider for those, which will be leveraging the SAML protocol to log into Salesforce, which is also why we have the My Domain enabled. The identity store that will be used here is a custom LDAP that was already part of the system landscape. In our Salesforce ecosystem, we see that we are using, aside, of course, of the communities, the DocuSign managed package app, as well as the Konga Composer. We will be using Service Cloud Knowledge, Service Cloud Voice, and Live Chat, as I mentioned earlier. And we'll also be using reports and dashboards and files. In addition, we're also bringing in the Tableau CRM functionalities as we need more advanced reporting needs. With regard to communication with external systems, this will be happening using secured communication using MTLS with the ESB and ETL. And the ETL will, of course, also be used for the data migration. We see that there's a few systems being deprecated and replaced. And the ETL will be used, as I will cover later on, to perform the data migration to either Salesforce or the data warehouse. In addition, the ETL will also be responsible for some regular data syncs between Salesforce and the Evergreen and NetSuite systems. The ESB, on the other hand, will be handling the more immediate orchestrations, where we have orchestration with both Evergreen and NetSuite as well, but also with the supplier systems and the governance systems. Finally, we also have a website where we will be having Web2Lead as a way to enter leads or get leads into our system. I will cover the integrations later on. So let's go to the data model. Here we see that we have an account. An account can have or can represent different types of entities. It can be a customer, a partner, or one of those external service agencies. We have different employees for these entities, which are modeled as contacts. If we're talking about the customer account, then we also will have the orders and the order products to symbolize the ordering that they will do with us. And we also know that we'll have to have the possibility to have recurring orders based on a specific schedule. So that's why we're introducing this custom object, the order schedule, and it will have one parent order, which will be kind of the template that will be reused, and a lot of child orders, which are then the orders stemming from the order schedule. Of course, if we're using orders, we want to make sure that we have the order products underneath, and we will be using price book entry, and product to get the correct pricing there. We will also be having for our customer accounts the lead, as I mentioned, that they can this will come in via the website and will later then be converted to account and contact. We'll also have the service contract, as this will represent the different tiers of service that they are entitled to, which will be captured in the aptly named entitlement object. From the entitlement, we can have different cases logs. So this will then be, again, corresponding to the SLAs as defined here. And these different cases can also be corresponding to particular orders in case something went wrong with an order. And this covers the customer flow, but of course our account can also be a supplier, in which case we are capturing the contract and contract line items in custom objects. I did consider here going with the Sales Cloud contract, but as I would need to introduce a custom contract line item child object anyway, and I would have less control with regard to sharing in this case, I opted for the custom objects instead. As you can see, we identified some large data volumes. I will cover in a moment with how we will mitigate those. But maybe another element I would like to mention is that we have a private OWD model and that we have some specific relationships. All the black arrows represent the normal lookups. We have some, this should be orange, but it looks more yellow. These are the special lookups behaving like master details, which are standard out-of-the-box Salesforce relationships. And then I have introduced this master detail here, and then we have some standard master detail here as well. All right, let's go to the data volumes. So here you can see which different entities an account can be and what the calculations there are. So we see that there's 1.6 million, which isn't directly a large data volume, but still I do think it's good to put a custom index on the payment status and the identification and verification validation status, because these will be used actively in queries. So I think it would be making those more performant. In addition, we would also be archiving inactive customers after 2 years, just as a matter of having a cleaner org. Because as you can see, it's not that much of a large data volume issue. However, we do have large data volumes issues on our order and order products. There we will have a more aggressive archival strategy. So in this case, all completed orders with their order products will be migrated to the data warehouse by the ETL. The only exception there is the partially completed orders we will not immediately archive. We'll only archive after 3 months, and there is a reporting need for this. That is why we're doing that. We also will be using some custom index on status for order and on product category on order product. And in our reporting, we'll use the default standard index on the record type. We also have quite a high number of service contracts, contract line items, and contracts. And this will be mostly on a yearly basis that we see this come in. So my proposal here would be to archive them after 2 years. Again, the ETL tool will be responsible for this. All right, moving on to the business requirements. As I mentioned, we have some variations in these processes which can differ from country to country. So that's why I propose to use record types and page layouts and also dynamic forms. The reason that I'm still using both is because dynamic forms are not supported on all standard objects yet, so we'll not be able to use them everywhere. With regard to the supplier process, there is an online registration process where the new suppliers can indicate what they would like to or what they are going to produce, and they can select this from a list. So this would be a public page in a partner community with the Lightning Web component where we can surface certain products and create contract and contract line items. Then we can use Omnichannel to direct this contract to the necessary account manager, which I assumed here would be a supplier agent because I didn't see a supplier account manager in the users described above. So, and also we want to, of course, assign the product manager. So this would be omnichannel skill-based routing, and we'll use pick lists on the contract to make sure that we can easily route them to the correct resources. Then the new supplier should be visited by the team for an inspection where a certain grading will be performed. Of course, this grading should only be seen by supplier agent and VPs. This will be facilitated by having specific fields on account to capture the grading information, and we will make sure that the field level security is actually only opened up for the supplier agent and VP profiles. In some countries, suppliers must have certain permits or government-issued information. And we see that some of these countries can use electronic data interchange. However, some still use email and fax, so that's quite tricky. And these documents are very important. We cannot move on with the onboarding until this is provided. So the idea here is to have a record trigger flow, which will initiate the first integration, which will be call out from, or not a call out, sorry, which will be initiated by Salesforce going via the ESB. It will follow the remote process invocation, fire and forget pattern, and will be actually a platform event being fired to which the ESB is subscribed. The ESB can then use JOT flow with the REST API to get additional information and check if the country that is needed supports the EDI. If they do, then it will call the governance system for this information. And once it gets it, it will actually again use the REST API to update this information back on the account. If the country does not support it, it will create a task for the account owner to contact the specific governance agency or system via email or fax. And one more part is we will block the onboarding by using a validation rule, which is based on a field that will indicate whether or not the onboarding or the information has been received. Next, the invoicing terms need to be established, and this will be by generating a document. In the past, this has been done manually, but now I propose adding Conga Composer into our Salesforce ecosystem, which will then, based on the contract and contract line items, generate a PDF document, which we can then send for electronic signature using DocuSign, which they are already using, but we would make it even more easy to use by installing the match package into Salesforce. And then finally, we see that that suppliers will use local currencies. And as I already mentioned in the beginning, we will have the multi-currency feature enabled. With regard to existing suppliers, we see that there should be recurring visits, and these should depend on certain criteria, such as number of cases, total revenue, grading, etc. And they should also be automatically scheduled. So we will have a scheduled job where we have the segmentation logic to indicate in which category the accounts fall, high touch or not so high touch. And then a task will be created to for the account owner to visit them, to schedule a visit. So this is actually covered in the previous one. So the creation of the activities should be performed automatically, as well as the segmentation. So that's okay. If the visits are missed, then the supplier regional VP should be notified. And we will actually have a scheduled job running, which will check if this task is not completed within a certain time frame. And then a chatter notification will be placed on the specific account to make sure that the supplier regional VP is highlighted or notified of this particular miss. Suppliers have annual contracts, and we have to make sure that the renewal is as easy as possible. So in order to do this, we will have a scheduled job set up again, where we will create a task for the contract owner to review the contract. For example, we can do this a month before it's about to expire. And then by having a lightning action on the contract, we can make it more easy to copy the contract. So it will be kind of declarative clone button rather than using the actual clone button. So maybe we can also clone certain child records, for example, make this process easier for them to work with. When it comes to new customers, they will have a registration form online where they can select the package membership. So that's the tiering, that's those different service contracts that we would like, the different entitlements. And then depending on the tier, they get certain benefits. So this would be the Web2 lead, where they can have a membership pick list, and this will become then a service contract with the correct entitlement when the lead is converted, because we're triggering that via record trigger flow. The customers can place the orders themselves, and they will do this via the community. So there will be, here it says typically about 5 a week, but you can see in our volumes that we took a bit more based on some later requirements. either way, the community should serve just fine for this requirement. There are a few situations where we want to revoke access to the marketplace in the current ecosystem being the community, of course. This is if the monthly fee is not received, and this will be covered by integration number 2. So this will be initiated by NetSuite, going again via the ESB, using the remote call-in pattern with the JOT authentication and a custom Apex REST service. And there, what it will do is it will update the payment status on account to indicate that there has been an issue with the payment. And we will also perform a freeze to the related users for this account. We will use an async future method to avoid mixed DML here. And the second reason why we would want to revoke access to the marketplace is that if there are outstanding invoices which are older than 120 days, and in this case, the ESB will be actually checking NetSuite to see if this is indeed the case. If it is, it will use the same Apex REST service as we have in integration number 2 and perform the similar actions which are defined there. So the biggest change here is who is initiating the call between integration 2 and 3. If a customer leaves and they want to sign up again, they are not allowed to for a period of 3, 6, or 9 months, and it's depending on their contract year. So when a lead is created, we will actually trigger a record trigger flow, and we will have this renewed sign-up status field, which will indicate whether or not the lead is allowed to be renewed. And we can also have a date field to indicate by when they would be able to renew at the earliest. With regard to orders, we see that the customers can browse the marketplace, and there they will see the supplier entered forecast. So the suppliers will be entering the forecast of what they predict they will be able to produce via the evergreen system, and this should be visible in the marketplace. And we want to have there a basket and checkout patterns. So what we want to do is we will have a community showing the products, and also a Lightning Web component on the product, which will allow them to see the predicted stock, as well as add the product to their basket for later checkout. And the predicted stock will be fetched using the remote process invocation request and reply with the external service, and using again JOT OAuth as the method of authentication. This will be stored in name credential, and it will get the stock for this particular product from Evergreen and show it to the customer. With regard to the next part of setting up recurring orders, I already explained this a bit when we were discussing the data model. So the customer can create an order schedule where they will indicate the frequency, is it daily, weekly, monthly, and they will have this parent order where it will contain what should be scheduled or what should be bought or ordered for this particular frequency. And then we can have a scheduled job checking this order schedule and creating the subsequent orders. When an order is confirmed, there should be some internal logic, which is currently housed in Marketplace, to select the appropriate suppliers and then send some email notification. So this particular logic of how it should be matching the suppliers, we can see here later in the requirements that this is defined and can be made available, so we can actually use this logic which is already defined and put it in an invocable method so that we can have a record reader flow on order with this invocable method with a matching logic to select the appropriate supplier. And then it will create a child order with order products for the products that will be bought for this particular supplier, and use an email alert with an email template, again, taking into account the multi-currency and multilingual part. So we have an email template per language. And we will also be taking into account that some suppliers want to have this data synced maybe immediately into their system. So that's the integration number 5, where we will have remote process invocation fire and forget, again, with a platform event to which is ESB subscribe. The ESB will check whether there is a supplier in this list that supports the EDI. If it does, then it will send the child order and order products which are specific to this supplier. And we can see later on that also upon this action, invoices need to be created in NetSuite. So this same integration, the orchestration of these actions will be done by the ESB. It will generate the invoices in NetSuite, sending the order products, as well as child order and child order products to NetSuite, as we see that NetSuite needs to create invoices for both the customer as well as for the supplier. And as I mentioned in my assumptions, NetSuite will be responsible for sending out the emails with these invoices. Another element to be mentioned here is that if an order cannot be met, then the account manager or the customer account director should be notified so that they can contact the customer and suggest alternatives. And my assumption here is that this is going to be an update from the supplier on these child order records where they indicate this is not possible by, for example, setting the status accordingly. And then we can have a record trigger flow, creating a chatter post, tagging both the relevant users so that they get this on their radar. With regard to service, customers can raise cases by telephone, email, or live chat. And we will facilitate this by using Service Cloud Voice for the CTI capabilities, email to case to get cases by email, of course, and then live chat embedded on the community to allow live chat with our support agents. With regard to the routing, we will be using omnichannel and will also be including macros and knowledge to increase the handling, to improve the average handling times and make sure that we can meet the SLAs, which are, as I mentioned, stored as service contracts with a specific entitlement per customer. Suppliers don't have this specific contract level agreement, so I propose having a default process there, which will be launched as, or will update the entitlement, upon the case creation using a record trigger flow. Also, when the case is closed, we want to make sure that we can send out or have a survey to determine the satisfaction of how this case was handled. My proposal would be here to have an embedded flow on a public community page, which will then update case fields, and we will send this link to this particular embedded flow with some certain parameters, for example, the case number, to the user with an email alert and email templates so that they can enter the information there. I did consider here going for Salesforce surveys, but considering this is the only place where surveys are mentioned and needed, I assume that going with a flow would be more suitable for this specific requirement. The financial queries should be handled by a specific team. They should be routed automatically and not be visible to any other service agents. So we will be still using the OWD private for case to make sure that the people who shouldn't have access don't. And then we'll use a specific record type and a criteria-based sharing rule to open up access to this particular team, which can be a public group or a queue. And we will be using omnichannel to make sure that these queries are routed accordingly. Next, we have the identification and verification process, where documented proof is needed that this has been indeed conducted. And the process I propose to have or documented as specific fields with history tracking on the account, as well as a validation rule to make sure that we can block the further steps in the process, any further actions, child creation, etc., until this process is completed. The customer also needs to specify a service PIN, and this is part of their sign up. So my proposal here is to make this part of a login flow and have that hidden PIN field on customer. With regard to the service agent partners, they can only get information if this IDV process is complete. So this would be, again, making sure that we put validation rules to not create anything on customers which have not gone through this process. We also want to make sure that they can only see partner information for the time period they have a case assigned to them for this particular partner. So the suggestion here is to have a record trigger flow on case to add them to the case team, and to remove them again from the case team depending on the status of the case. With regard to the data requirements, let me first go to the data migration overview. There we go. So we have a few source systems where we see data coming from. So this is the service inquiries database, the registration portal, Genesis, CTA system, marketplace app, all of these being decommissioned. So we definitely need to migrate the information there or assess whether it needs to be migrated because we're not using them again afterwards. And then we have the Evergreen NetSuite systems, which we will continue to use, but we'll also be bringing some data from there into Salesforce to have a unified overview of certain data. All of this information will be pushed to the ETL, where we will have a staging database where we will clean, dedupe, standardize, and link our data via external IDs. From the ETL, we will then be pushing any historic information to the data warehouse. So this is anything that isn't relevant to keep into Salesforce that's not active or current anymore, but we still want to keep somewhere. So then the data warehouse. In Salesforce, we will push the information with some test iterations. We'll start with having 10% pushed on QA, 50% on INT, and 100% on UAT, so we can test the logic as well as the loading and the performance before actually pushing to production. For each of these, we will be deactivating or deferring the sharing automations and validations. We'll also be using the bulk API and order our records by parent. If there's hierarchical data, we'll perform multiple loads, and we will link the data again, child and parent, via external IDs. We'll also make sure that our migration user has the appropriate user permissions, such as, for example, setting the audit fields upon creation, so we can keep created information so we don't lose that data. The order of which we should load the objects, the records in, is we have to make sure that the internal user are created first, then the accounts, contacts, and external users, and these can come from nearly all of the systems, as you can see. The products, price books, and price book entries will push in from Evergreen. The orders and order products will be pushing in from the marketplace and NetSuite. And then contracts, contract line items will be bringing in from Evergreen and NetSuite. Finally, service contracts and entitlements will be bringing in from Marketplace and NetSuite again. And then finally, the cases are from either this service inquiries database or from Genesis in case that they were not pushed into the former. So looking at the data requirements, we see that there are some volumes specified, which we covered in our data volumes overview, as well as with the mitigations that we would use for those. However, it also mentioned that the order details should be available for detailed review for 3 years, and the summary for the past 5 years for trend reporting. So as this data will no longer be kept in Salesforce, as you can see in the long-term mitigation, I propose using here the Tableau CRM for this older data and having a connector for the data warehouse. This is again covered in the data volumes, but we also want to make sure that they can see 5 years of history for case information, again, because this will cover also archived information, archived cases. We'll be using Tableau CRM. Finally, a bit more detail about this case records that we will be bringing in. The data quality is a bit questionable, so it will need to be clean and standardized. I already mentioned that this is part of my data migration process, but I think it's important to highlight that the data governance board will be involved here, making sure that we have the correct SMEs and that we also bring in the correct MDM tooling depending on how complex the logic of duplicate identification is. With regard to visibility and security, we want to see the customer account managers having view all rights to their accounts, as they will be owning the accounts. That should not be an issue. This will be owner-based sharing. The customer account director should view all account records in their overall hierarchy. So this should not be an issue because they are at the top of the role hierarchy, so everything will roll up to them. So normally that should again not be an issue at all. With regard to having visibility on child cases, This is covered with child implicit sharing, sorry. And with regard to having visibility on the orders, we can use criteria-based sharing there. Then we have the service agents who should only see cases for the markets that they are assigned to. And the assignments can vary on a lot of criteria, which are covered in our system with the skills. So we will limit first visibility of cases by setting the OWD to private. And then because they will be assigned to these specific cases matching these criteria using omnichannel, they will be the owner in that case, and they will again have the owner-based sharing. There are a few requirements, such as this one, where we have to have, again, visibility on somewhat older information or data that may not be in the system anymore. So this service agent partners, which are external users, need to see customers who have passed the IDV, but only while they have open cases. That part we covered already before. But in addition, they only need to see the 5 most recent orders, and 12 months of cases. So my proposal here would be to have a Lightning Web Component so we can fetch this data from the data warehouse. We can actually use a parameter to indicate how many recent orders we need. And we can use also a combination in our Lightning Web Component by querying first in Salesforce to see if there's any active orders there, and only get the remaining orders from the data warehouse that are already archived. So that is this particular integration using, again, the remote process invocation request and reply. With regard to cases, we're using similar logic there with a similar pattern, and again, a Lightning Web Component. Yeah, this one I covered already. So it's about the finance service agents being able to see these, or being the only ones able to see the payment queries. We covered that with criteria-based sharing and a record type. And then the VP of service should see all cases. So this is going to be handled by having view all object level access for cases on their particular profile. With regard to order information being visible in Salesforce without navigating away, we can reuse the earlier mentioned Lightning Web Component. This will make sure that even if the order is archived, we can still open it up using this Lightning Web Component. If it should include details from scheduling recurring orders, then we can query the current orders to make sure these are included too. And we can also query the order schedule records to simulate the recurring orders and show them in that way, of the ones which should be next up to be seen or to be ordered. Then we have the product manager. They need to see all accounts which provide produce within their categories and all corresponding cases, as well as order summary, but not the details. So this is quite specific. It covers information from different locations, and it also is quite tricky to open up. Plus, it's a large number of data. So for this reason, I propose using Tableau CRM, as it will allow us to bring in data from different objects in one data set and show it in a more easily filterable manner to the product managers, also taking into account what their exact portfolio is. The supplier agents need to see all supplier records in their region with the product listing and forecast. So as I mentioned, I did not bring in the forecast. They remain in Evergreen. So this is again going to be a Lightning Web Component doing a real-time call out to the Evergreen system to get this information. Then we have some customers needing to see their own cases and orders. And here for the orders, we can again use the first Lightning Web Component with the integration, where we can set how many orders should be shown. And it can be it can be a combination of the current and historic orders. With regard to their cases, this is also covered in the earlier Lightning Web Component. And then finally, we have the suppliers who need to be able to view cases about products that they supplied. And here, because these cases may again be archived already, we will be having, again, a Lightning Web component where we can easily fetch this information from the data warehouse, and we can filter on the supplier. There are some other reporting needs. So again, the product managers who need to see cases for products within their portfolio. So as I mentioned, we'll be using Tableau CRM here. The VP of customer account managers should see all customers who have not paid, so who are locked out of the marketplace. And this can be leveraged using a standard report on account, filtered by record type and payment status, which is, again, a very good reason to index this, so it will improve performance. The customer account managers need to report on customers who have not been able to get more than 3 orders fulfilled in the past 3 months. So I propose here a standard report on accounts with orders, and we filter by order record type customer and this order status partially completed, which is, again, why we are keeping these in the system a bit longer. Then the supplier VPs should report on suppliers who are not that great at providing accurate forecasts. So that's, again, Tableau CRM that I would use here, because this is not in the system. It's also possibly quite a bit of data. So we would use external data source for Evergreen. With regard to the project and development requirements, we see that we have a certain governance structure where we have the executive sponsor at the top, leading the steering committee, where the high-level roadmap, budgeting, etc. is being discussed, of which the program manager is a part, and they will, on their turn, be leading a center of excellence where we have stakeholders from the Change Control Board, Change Management Board, Design Authority, Data Governance Board, QA team, and Legal and Compliance. Regarding our environment lifecycle, we will have a branching strategy where we have a branch per or corresponding in most cases to a specific environment. So we'll have the master for production, developed for UAT, which is a full copy, but the metadata of which will also be pushed into the training environment, which will be developer pro sandbox. Next, we will have a partial copy for our in sandbox. And then we will have multiple feature QA branches going into their corresponding QA developer sandboxes. And finally, again, different feature branches for the dev specific features to be developed. And this will be Scratch orgs, where we will have unit tests, jest tests, static code analysis, and peer code review being part of our Bitbucket pipelines. And this will be going all the way up until our production release. Starting in our Q&A, our QA sandbox, we will also be doing automated regression tests, and this will continue as part of our Bitbucket pipelines up until UAT. In QA, we'll also be doing system testing. In INS, we'll be doing system integration and integration testing. And in UAT, we'll be doing user acceptance, load, and performance testing, as well as smoke testing and confirmation testing in case a bug was found on production, and fixed in a hotfix and brought in via the normal flow back into UAT for this smoke and confirmation tests. And finally, in production, we'll also do some smoke testing to make sure everything was deployed correctly. Our design and define will be, our discovery will be documented in Confluence. Our units of work will be corresponding to Jira tickets. We'll then have Git, Bitbucket, and Bitbucket pipeline, as well as SonarQube, to enforce this this code quality, this SonarQube being the product to enforce the static code analysis, The automated regression testing will be performed by Provar, and we will use ETL in the QA sandboxes for data seeding and masking. In UAT, we'll also be using Confluence to document the results of the user acceptance, and on training, we'll also be using ETL for data seeding and masking. As you can see, this is a source-driven development that we will use with Agile, so a hybrid methodology. The requirements is that we have mostly REST-based integrations where possible, so this will be handled by our ESB, which can do protocol conversion. We also want to support our development team in Manila, so we will have a design authority to set the guidelines, review the designs, as well as some quality gates in CI/CD, as I mentioned before. And then finally, we want to make sure that we can go with frequent releases with minimal bugs, where we will have CI/CD to perform this source-driven development and to have this automated regression testing to make sure we minimize the potential issues there. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is aside from the integrations we need at the moment of or as part of the business process, we also have some data syncs being performed where we sync customers from Salesforce to NetSuite and products from Evergreen to Salesforce. And that's it. Okay, that was me.
Morning.
Okay, I will share my screen again so that if there's anything specific I can answer.
Here I have one question. So Lilith, you replaced Evergreen and the marketplace at the same time, right? What is the impact of that decision? Do you see any risk or anything?
Yeah, so that's definitely a good point. So I do see risk in that. So that's why I propose a partial replacement of Evergreen, just having some things which were previously captured by the registration portal now being the partner community, and also the logging of cases and such, bringing that to the partner community as well. If we want to fully replace Evergreen in its totality, then yeah, that would be a follow-up phase for me, not in the initial part of the project.
Okay, but you're assuming that Evergreen might be only used by the same user. What if the Evergreen has an integration with all other existing systems? What is the impact on that decision?
You mean on the long term or the short term here?
In the long term, so Evergreen might be integrated and be used by many users, many different systems. We don't know extent, and we don't have a full requirement, right? So how did you take the decision that that system has to be replaced?
Yeah, one of the reasons that led me there is the request for mobile requirements, and we know that Evergreen doesn't have one. So I did consider going with another type of app, such as, for example, a hybrid mobile app or a native app in this case, and then mimic the requirements or mimic the functionalities of Evergreen there. However, I figured that this would then have a bigger impact on the long term, because then anytime we would want to make changes to the communities, to this functionality, it would again involve development, while with mobile publisher, we could actually make it quite configurable, quite declarative for a lot of functionalities, which is why I opted for that solution in the end.
Okay. Yoji?
Yeah, Lilith. So in terms of country-specific variations, you're saying you're handling them by record types on the Salesforce side. What kind of impact would this have or not have on your dev lifecycle?
In this case, because it's single org, it depends, of course, on how the development teams are structured, but I would not have region-specific teams. I would rather have functional-specific or functionality-specific work streams. So in that case, on the CI/CD lifecycle, there wouldn't immediately be an impact. No, yeah.
What about in terms of tracking user stories to see, like, if you have a regional variation, to be able to identify user stories that are of that variation, or from branching perspective?
Yeah, I would use the unit. So I would use Jira, and we can use specific labels for each country to indicate that these are stories specific to, let's say, Belgium or Italy. And in that way, we can quite easily find them and have the traceability back to the specific commits and full process that went down in our version control system.
Yeah. Really, if you go on the system requirement in the NetSuite in your Word document.
Okay.
And one paragraph below that NetSuite. Yeah, wait here, right? So if you read right on the seventh requirement, third paragraph, currently they provide support by telephone and email. How did you solve that requirement, that whole line?
For the telephone requirement, I introduced Service Cloud Voice, and for the email, I have email to case to support this.
Okay. And what you're doing for the case deflection?
I would have the knowledge. Oh yeah, maybe I should have. I introduced knowledge, but I mostly mentioned it as part of improving the handling times. We could open up knowledge base to our customer community users as well, so we can have some FAQs, some self-service that they don't need to necessarily log a case. Yeah, I should have mentioned that as well. Sorry.
Okay. And let's assume that just on the case deflection follow-up, customer, let's say, needs to set up their password, right? Or they are having some problem with the order. How the knowledge base would help? Can somehow there is any product in Salesforce that you can automate those stuff?
Yeah, indeed. So as we already have live chat, we could use chat bots here to have our standard answers, standard actions that need to be taken here by the chat bots, as opposed to having these common requests being handled by actual agents.
Okay. Andre?
And sorry, I got disconnected and I may have missed, if this has been asked, just say and we'll move on. You've decommissioned the marketplace app. There was a lot of existing logic in there. So firstly, could you talk me through your justification for why you decommissioned that? And secondly, where is that logic going to exist within the Salesforce platform?
So,
Yeah,
we asked that question.
You asked that one, right? Okay, thank you. Sorry. Looking at your data model then, if I'm still allowed a question. You talked around the org-wide defaults. You've got external users on here. Can you just explain the differences for the external org-wide defaults compared to the internal, if any?
Well, yeah, as you can see, I have a private internal org-wide default setups, and the external org-wide defaults cannot be more permissive than the internal ones, so they will have the same logic here. They will also have all private.
And just follow up on the data model price books. What's the visibility there?
Yeah, you can have, I believe, use, view only, and private. And I think here I can go with let's say view only for internal and private for external, as I will be using a Lightning Web Component to guide them through the checkout process anyway, the ordering process.
Okay, thank you. Georgi?
Yeah, Lilith, can you walk me through how the recurring and one-time orders works on your data model?
Mm-hmm. So with regard to the one-time order, this is going to go via the community. They will select the different products they want, and then this will create an order with order products, which they will see on their checkout page. On that checkout page, they can also indicate whether or not this should be a recurring one. If they do, then we can set up, or we can create behind the scenes an order schedule, which will state what is the frequency, is it daily, monthly, weekly, or is it, and when should it start? So maybe it's only supposed to start from next month. So that is something that we can allow them to enter in the Lightning Web Component and then store in the order schedule. And then we'll have this scheduled job running to query this scheduled order schedule and create the order and order product records accordingly.
So is there a one-to-one relationship between order and order schedule?
Well, an order schedule will have their parent order, which is the one that is the initial creation. And then we'll have child orders, which are the ones created from the order schedule, so the recurring ones.
Okay, so if you have a recurring order and child orders from that recurring order, what is the relationship?
I'm sorry, can you repeat? I don't quite understand.
So you have like, are you saying that you have the child one-off orders and then their parent order is the recurring order?
No, for the one-off orders, we don't need any parent, any recurring. So this structure of having the order schedule is only in case that they select this upon checkout. They can still, if they don't select it, it's just completely not related to any order schedule. It just is a one-time one.
Okay. And so the order schedule is representing, I want to place this recurring order on like a monthly basis starting from this time. Why do you have it as a separate object rather than denormalizing it on the order?
Yeah, that's a good question. The reason why I initially did it is because I thought it would be easier to manage separately, but I guess it could be denormalized on the order as well. Yeah, you're right. We could do it that way.
What would be your recommendation then?
Well, in this case, I would propose to indeed place the information on the order itself rather than on the order schedule. Yeah.
Okay. And then the account lookup from the order, what is that representing?
This is the parent account, so the account for which the order is being created. So this is the customer for whom the order is going to be supplied.
And how do we represent who is the supplier for the order?
You're right. So there should be another custom lookup for the child orders to the specific supplier account. That would make sense. So I should have added that one. That would be a custom lookup though.
Okay. Tantra?
Yeah, Lilith. So follow-up question on what Georgie asked on the order schedule. So you're saying that you will go with the solution of keeping the fields at the direct order level. Now we have a large data volume, and every time you need to figure it out that which order is a kind of schedule and that you need to auto-create. Do you think that keeping the denormalized field is the right solution in terms of LDV?
Well, I think if we can, for example, use a specific record type for this to indicate that this is indeed a recurring one, then that is an index field that we can already use to, only do it, only use the index table normally rather than the full table scan. So I think with smart indexing, it should be fine there.
Okay. Another question I have is on the data model, I see you have a contract and contract line item. Are those custom object or standard object?
Yeah, they're custom. I did consider the standard ones, but in the end, I opted for custom ones as I would have more control with regard to visibility, because the standard contract, sales contract, has some specific sharing implications with regard to the account.
And did you see any requirement on the security that asks to control the security of contract different than account?
That's a good question. I didn't immediately know, but I did expect that this might be the case. Let me think.
Okay, I don't have any other question on the data model. Andrew?
Not the data model, but can we look at service item G? There's a requirement to make sure and actually record that ID and V has been completed. You talked about a login flow, which is obviously valid when the customer logs in. What about when they ring up or they send an email or it's some other channel that doesn't involve them logging in explicitly? How would you solve that?
Yeah, well, in either way, the customer has to specify the service PIN, and I believe that this should be something that they should do in a relatively, or not a relative, in a secure way. So this would not be something that we would want them to do via, for example, to the support agent while they are calling. So they should have actually set their PIN before they start calling the support center, right?
Yeah.
So we could send out an email template highlighting this to the customer and adding also a link to the community so that they would, be advised to first create the PIN via the login flow.
So they've created a service PIN. I get that, but they're out in the field, in the car, whatever. They ring the center. How does the ID and V process look like in that regard? Yeah,
that's a good question. So I wasn't exactly sure what the identification and verification process would entail concretely. So I assume that this was going to be tackled by a separate team. In that regard, I don't believe that the support agent will be very easily able to do this. So if we really want to make sure that this is performed before any other process is fired, as I had understood from this scenario, then we should, then the support agent should bring over or convey this information that, sorry, you have to make sure that you have the identity and verification before we can provide support.
Okay, just looking at your system landscape with regards to this, they're coming in through Service Cloud Voice, right? Is there any features there we could make use of?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. So for Service Cloud Voice, we can, of course, enable that we can see who they are. So if that is sufficient, that we know, for example, this phone number should be okay, maybe sending an SMS to verify that they are who they say they are, have some kind of verification on their email. If that is sufficient, then perhaps that is something that we can indeed do, because we get this information from Service Cloud Voice into our Salesforce console.
Okay, thank you. Yuri?
Yeah, sorry, can you go back to the data model? So can you walk me through the whole customer onboarding process? I think you mentioned that it would revolve around the lead account contact object. Can you walk me through how the flow works?
Yeah, indeed. So let me go to this part as well. There we go. So it mentioned that there would be a registration form online where they would enter certain information. So once they do, then a lead is created in the system. On the lead, the communication with the specific customer can continue. We can, for example, ask them certain questions. My assumption here was that once we have enough information, we know that they will be actually collaborating with us. We will convert the lead, and then we'll have the service contract where we can, for example, generate this official contract. We can again use Conga Composer potentially and DocuSign to have this electronic signature captured. And once that is done, then we can activate this service contract and bring them in as actual customers, perform the onboarding, give them access to the community and such. It's not exactly all mentioned in the scenario, but that's how I assumed the process would look like.
Okay. And in terms of the supplier onboarding, the same question, can you walk me through?
Yeah, for the supplier onboarding, they would also have this online registration process, but the difference there was that it requires a lot more information about the products that they will produce, etc. So that's why I propose to have this Lightning Web Component creating already, or first of all, surfacing this product so we can select them, and then creating the contract and contract line items. And with those, I would propose, also creating immediately the contact and the account for this particular supplier. And then after the contract is signed, I believe this is happening here, then we will actually open up access to the community as well for them.
So are you initially creating the account and contact as soon as they fill out this LWC?
Yes, I assumed in this case that we would do it indeed in that way.
Okay. And then for point number 2, we need to assign it to the account manager and product manager based on like the product line that they're interested in. Mm-hmm. How are you handling that? Yeah,
so here I would use omnichannel. Of course, we cannot use omnichannel on account, but I use it on the custom object contract, which should be fine. And there we can then assign it accordingly to the relevant supplier agent in this case, based on, for example, the region. And we can assign it to the program manager based on, for example, the product category. That could be a pick list that we select on contract, for example.
So are you you're assigning the case via omnichannel, and then how does it get how does the visibility to both users work after someone picks, or sorry, you're assigning the, I think, contract via omnichannel, and then how does the visibility work when someone picks up the contract and assigns it to themselves?
Yeah, in this case, the contract I would assign to, or I would, assign. So the ownership, should go to the supplier agent, so they would get access through that mechanism. With regard to the products, I think yeah, I would propose using in this case Apex managed sharing, just because I think with regard to the products it's a bit more complexity. So I think that that might be the best way to solve the visibility there.
Okay. Jitendra?
Yeah, so follow-up question on Georgie. So on the new supplier A, so it's a public website, right? LWC component, anybody can come and anybody can enter the information, and you're directly creating an account and contact, right? Do you see any concern about the data quality, data volume, because it's a public hosted website? Is there something better way before you are doing account or contact?
Yeah, I mean, we could consider here also having a type of form. I did consider, of course, web delete here as well, but because we need to show which products and allow them to select them, this is more complexity than a web delete can handle. So that's why I didn't want to go that way. However, we could perhaps also use a managed package such as form assembly, which then they have these kinds of mechanisms to defend against DOS stacks, SQL injections, those kinds of things. So then I would, that would be a more secure way to go, I guess. So that will likely be less hassle on our development team.
Okay, so again, because of that decision, right, you are creating a multiple objects in a single execution, and then you're also not able to use a properly omnichannel. Why can't you create a lead directly from LWC and then use a lead assignment process, omnichannel, and everything out of the box?
Yeah, this would be a possibility, but then we have the lead with, I guess, some junction to the products, because we still need to select the junction. So in that case, the junction would then afterwards be converted to this type of contract line item. So it would be possible, but the reason I didn't go for it initially is because I see that this could be quite a big number of records, and in that case I would have it in two locations, both here as well as a junction on lead. So it is possible. I didn't do it because of that reason.
Okay, so right now, how you're relating product with account? So you're saying that you don't need junction in this case when you create an account?
Well, the junction will go through this particular contract. So we have a contract linked to an account, and underneath the contract, we have these contract line items. So that's how.
Okay. In the same, can you go on the requirement number E, new supplier E, how the sales cycle is happening here? So invoicing terms can be happening, a lot of negotiations between the customer and the internal user. How end-to-end the process is working here?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if we see that here we have a lot of communication, a lot of negotiation back and forth, then it may be better to step away from this custom solution that I considered at first and go for something more like opportunity line items, or opportunity products, and then with the quotes where we can have the different types where we are communicating with the customer. So that would be a way to have more different types of offers, more room for negotiation, if that is the foreseen requirement.
And do you see any impact of this decision? Impact on licensing, etc.?
Oh yeah, definitely. So if we were going that way, then we would need to make sure that these are our supplier agents, that they actually have Sales Cloud, and likely both, because we are still using Service Cloud capabilities. So then they would need both licenses, because okay, they can still access opportunities with Service Cloud, but they cannot access quotes. So in that case, we would need to make sure they have Sales Cloud as well. And then we have the product manager to to do the same thing.
Andrew?
Thanks. Looking at visibility and security, number 3, service agents should be able to see cases for markets to which they are assigned, and they can be assigned to many markets. You talked about when the service agent is the owner, but they're not going to be the owner of all cases within their market. So how would you solve that?
No, indeed. So the assumption that I had here was indeed that we have only the service agent who is assigned who needs to see this. If that is not the case, if we see that, okay, we have this cross-section visibility to be created, then, well, it depends on the complexity. If we have a lot of different skills, experience, and languages that need to be supported, then going for criteria-based sharing with different queues would not, provide a valid solution there, because we would run into our limit of 50 criteria-based sharing rules per object. So in that case, I think it would be, again, likely going to be Apex sharing to support this complexity.
Okay, say you had, just simplify a bit, say you had an agent who serviced Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. What would be just with that requirement alone, what would be the most straightforward way to solve that so they could always see cases that came from accounts in those countries?
We could have public groups per country and make them part of all of the public groups which they are supporting, and then use criteria-based sharing rules to open up to these specific countries in that case.
Okay, thank you. In this section, generally, you use Lightning Web Components quite heavily. Did you think about any other solutions you could have used to solve some of the sharing and visibility requirements within this?
Yes, I did. So one of the things, for example, the visibility on the forecasting, I did consider maybe looking at external object here and bring it in that way, so that we would have the OData connection, bringing in the data virtualization in that way, the forecast as an external object. Mm-hmm. However, external object has some limitations when it comes to controlled sharing, so it doesn't have support for sharing. So you would have to already think about how are you going to do this. One of the ways that we could then still control it is by having them have also using the named user and having them a user in the other system, which in this case might be a valid assumption to make, as it's the supplier agent, so likely they will have evergreen access already. So maybe it would have been a better solution actually to go for this particular object with the external object.
Okay, and I don't want to talk through each of them, but as I say, you use Lightning Web Components quite heavily, but you ruled out external objects for the other requirements.
Well, for some of the other requirements, a lot of them use the same Lightning Web Components, so that already reduces it. And then I did consider external objects for the historical data, but there I didn't want to impact the, again, first of all, I didn't want to open up access unintentionally, so likely I would still be using a Lightning Web Component to control what they can actually see from the external object. So that's one consideration I made. And a second one there was also that we may have different retention schedules. So there may be an odd mix of what is still in the, sorry, I was trying to show the data volumes. So we may have an odd mix of some cases being in the related list here and others being in the external cases related list, or whatever we want to call them. And me as a user, I don't care how my customer or my company is going to archive their data. I want to get a pretty unified overview regardless of where it's being kept. And that is why I think with Lightning Web Components, again, we have more control over this.
Okay, thank you. You okay?
Yes, on the same section, requirement 9 around Tableau CRM for the report. So I think this will work in terms of actually having a report to show this data. What about record level? How do we enforce record level sharing on the Tableau CRM side?
Yeah, on Tableau CRM side, you have two ways to do this. And the first one is of course, only for data that you're pulling in from Salesforce. That's inherited sharing. There you can select an object that's part of your data set that you want to inherit the sharing from. However, you do have the limitation there that if you exceed 3,000 sharing descriptors for a record, it will no longer use this type of security. It will fall back on your secondary mechanism, which is the security predicate. And this is where you will then define, for example, whether which fields should match on the record level. For example, in case of case, should the case ID or case owner ID match the user ID, something like that. That's the security predicate logic.
Okay, so for requirement 9, what would your security predicate look like?
Yeah, in this case, I would try to, yeah, of course, security predicate wise. For this one, I think I would actually use an appended table where I bring in also the share table, because we have Apex sharing here. So it's quite difficult to use only the information on the record itself, because as I mentioned later, for the product managers, we're using Apex sharing. So I would bring in the share table and set the security predicate based on that.
Could you go to the system landscape, please?
Yeah.
Okay. I think you mentioned that you were archiving to a data warehouse. Can you explain where it fits on your system landscape?
Yeah, so I may have drawn it to yeah, I squeezed it in a bit, sorry. So the data warehouse is here. It's really tiny. And the ETL is there. So what is actually the ETL doing? It's going to see, based on the retention schedules that we're setting up, which are of course validated with our business stakeholders. Data governance board is going to, you know, take these kinds of decisions together with legal. And then the ETL will follow these described retention schedules to get the data from Salesforce. If we have related information, for example, we have orders as well as order products, we need to make sure that we bring in both of them. And we are bringing them to the corresponding tables in the data warehouse. Afterwards, we will be deleting the information from Salesforce. I would propose doing a hard delete, because this will improve in performance. If we're a bit faint of heart and we want to keep it in the recycle bin, we can also do a soft delete, but I would not advise that.
Okay. And let's just say for whatever reason we can't go with a data warehouse, what would be some other alternatives for archiving data?
Well, we have big objects as well, which would also be a valid solution, in the sense that these are quite tricky to query, quite tricky to surface, because they don't have standard UI currently available for them. However, we already have Tableau CRM, so that would be a possibility too. The reason why I didn't do it is because I assume that we're also using data warehouse to archive data from other systems outside of Salesforce.
Okay. What about any other options? Do we have any App Exchange partners we could look at?
Yeah. I mean, we do have, for example, on backup, Oraceva and others, but what they will be doing is very similar, very similar thing. Of course, I don't feel obliged to say this in no way whatsoever, but of course, way more maintenance friendly, user friendly, admin friendly, for sure, for sure.
Oh, sorry, I just wanted to give Andrew a shout out there. But
yeah.
Jitendra, go ahead.
Lilith, can you go on your integration slide? I think slide number 7.
Yeah.
And integration number 4. I see you are using external services, and you're also using that's a JWT. Can you go on the order requirement number A?
Yeah.
Can you walk me through the whole process, order A?
Yeah, so from a user point of view, you will see a lot of products. On each product, you will have a Lightning Web Component, and this will show whether it's available or not. And then you can select the product added to your basket. and whether or not it's available. So this predicted stock, for example, we have that many, I don't know, salaries available for the next month. This is information that we will get via this external service, which is integration number 4, where we were getting this specific forecast for this specific product. And that's what we're showing then. If they select it, then they go to the rest of the checkout process, which I can describe as well if you want to.
So how exactly the LWC and external services would work together? Can you walk me through how the handover would happen between these two?
Yeah, so what an external service is actually doing, so once you create this in Salesforce, once you generate it, it will actually make sure that you have an Apex class with an invocable method created. So you can actually call this also from your Lightning Web Component, not just from a screen flow or from a flow. And that is what I would propose here, that we then call this specific method from our Lightning Web Component controller.
Okay. Andrew?
Looking back at the current systems, Marketplace has some geolocation logics, and I know you've moved all the logic to Salesforce. We talked about that, but can you specifically talk me through how we're going to meet that requirement in Salesforce and any volume considerations related to that?
Yeah, I'm sorry, it's part of the first requirements, right? The description of the object.
Yeah, current systems number 6. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, from the way that I had understood the geolocation was just giving a bit more information about where the restaurant is, and maybe if you have multiple restaurants and you have this app, which we saw that you have chains, so that maybe when you're at the location of this particular restaurant and you want to book for them, buy for them, then it would capture the geolocation and select the restaurant accordingly. I didn't interpret it as being able to track the deliveries. If that is the case, then yeah, Salesforce is not quite as suited to capture this information.
Yeah, it's not about tracking them. It's about making sure that the produce can be fresh. So it needs to go from like local suppliers, so that matching the restaurant locations and the field.
Okay, well, as the restaurants are accounts, as are the suppliers, we can use the geolocation fields there. If we have to have, to calculate distance and such, if we need to have even more granularity on the exact field that a farmer may be using, then we need to really extend the solution, because that is not something I took into account immediately.
Okay, that's fair. Georgi?
Yeah, in the same section, could you go to point 1? So it's saying for the LDAP to store the identity, GNV would like advice on how to better manage separation of supplier, customer, and internal users. Can you share your recommendation? Yeah,
so with regard to the internal user and service users, I assume that they would stay in this custom LDAP, and that Okta would be the identity provider for this particular identity store for them, because they are really managed and more provisioned there, because we have really contracts with specific partner agencies to do this service for us. As it's a bit more flexible with the customers and suppliers being added, I figured Salesforce would actually be a very good tool to use for the identity provider, and would then also potentially open up access for the suppliers to, for example, Evergreen. And I believe those are the only 2 systems that the suppliers need access to, while the customers only, in my interpretation, need access to Salesforce. So there definitely Salesforce would be appropriate as the identity provider.
Okay, makes sense. And then on the system landscape, you have mobile publisher for your customer and suppliers. What about your internal users? What are they using for mobile?
Yeah, I didn't immediately see any mobile requirements, but I would assume that they would be able to manage with the standard Salesforce mobile app.
Okay. Jitendra?
We'll go on the governance requirement number 1, Lilith.
Yeah.
So what would you do to make sure that all the integrations are the REST API based as much as possible? What would you do there?
Yeah, so of course we don't always have control over this, depending on the systems that we're dealing with, especially with the governance systems. But in order to make sure that at least we have REST APIs being used between Salesforce and the ESB, or between other systems where we have more control over this, I propose to have the protocol conversion functionality which an ESB should offer to leverage this to have as much REST-based integrations as possible.
Okay, so that's a technical term, but in terms of the conflict resolution, so let's say you have a different integration team, and how would you enforce and how would you suggest that all the integration teams that, okay, don't go with the SOAP API or everything and go for the rest? How would you handle that?
Oh yeah, in that way, that would be similar to how I solved the second requirement, where I would set up a design authority. There we would set the guidelines. So in this case, the design authority in this situation is of course rather Salesforce specific. If we're talking about these REST-based integrations, is going to be an even higher level, because we have to communicate this with the other external system development teams as well. But this would be something that would be agreed upon there, and then brought into our Salesforce best practice through the design authority.
Okay, so coming back to that second requirement, it is clearly mentioned that Manila team do not know Salesforce. What you're doing to handle that situation?
Yeah, with regard to that, I would propose some initial onboarding, some initial trainings there to get them acquainted with Salesforce, as well as maybe some pair programming in the beginning, and some detailed peer code reviews in the beginning as well, to make sure that they are very aware of what the system is, how they can improve, and that they have all the resources they need to grow into this new environment.
Okay, Andrew?
No, I've got no more questions. I actually need to drop fairly soon.
Is it then okay maybe to go to feedback, because I'm really curious to what you think?
I think I'm also out of the question.
Okay. Okay, so maybe now I can stop blushing, because I always blush when I get very nervous. So.
I have one last question though.
Oh no.
Go on, finish it, wrap it up. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Just one. For the last requirements in project and development, do you see any risks there in your solution?
I see. Yeah, I mean, for the ETL, we're using bulk API, but I think the new bulk API is REST-based, so that should be fine.
No, but I mean for the third bullet. So in project and development, it says the CIO would like to commit to frequent releases and would like advice on how to achieve this with minimal issues, bugs, and downtime. Given your solution, do you see any risks there?
So unrelated from the first one, right? So it's really this point that you're asking about.
Really this
okay.
point.
Sorry. Okay, I got confused there. Yeah, I mean, one of the risks, of course, is the fact that with the mobile publisher, if there's substantial changes where we are actually changing the app, so this would be mostly when we're, for example, adding new reliability on native capabilities, that we will need to again submit for security review, which can take quite a bit of time. So that would definitely have an impact on the frequent releases.
Okay, but how's your automation regarding the release to production, the deployment to production? When does that happen?
I would go, no, that's not the one. I would go with bi-weekly sprints in this case, and then we can have either bi-weekly or monthly releases, depending on what we're working with, but I think that should be fine.
Okay. That's not good enough. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks.